Thanks for joining us once again. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Our focus today is that Bob Lutz predicted 5 years ago that GM would beat Tesla by now. And then a year ago, Mary Barra, the current CEO of GM, predicted that they would spend about $25 billion and surpass Tesla by 2025. So we want to explore what's going on with this prediction and therefore what does the future look like. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. I want to also thank our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show, would like some ideas on investing and trading, please join us over in the Patreon space as well. So I wanted to, so what we've been doing is sort of coming up with certain beats that we cover. And this is kind of a GM, Bob Lutz, Mary Barra beat that we tend to do on a semi-regular basis. Obviously, they're a large competitor. Their moves definitely impact the market and do influence Tesla as well. So I first wanted to go through sort of a series of events in terms of GM defining what the future would look like based on the manpower and people and money that they have at their disposal. And then I want to go into what the reality has been versus their prediction, and then sort of go into, well, what does the future look like based on what we've been seeing? So one of the most amazing comments I've heard as we look at the growth of Tesla over time is that Bob Lutz indicated 5 years ago that over 100 models would be introduced by competitors, especially GM, that promised 20 models by now. And what would then happen is that market saturation would in essence wipe out Tesla because of the resources across all the brands, Audi, GM, all the major brands that have large footprints globally. And so therefore, Tesla would just disappear and not exist anymore. So the reality is, if we just concentrate on the United States, despite some stumbles by Elon, Tesla is still at 65% market share when it comes to electric vehicles. So that's awesome. The next thing that pops up is that there's an interesting, I want to say, meeting of minds that's going on. So if we go backwards 100 years, there was a company called, well, the predecessor to GM was actually like 4 companies that were merged. And so let's call it GM of the 1920s, and let's call it Ford of the 1920s. Well, what happened back then is that obviously Ford did vertical integration, and then what ended up happening was that GM giving customers a lot of options across all their brands, and another technique called outsourcing pretty much beat down Ford, in essence making Ford a market player, but GM basically took over the market lead in terms of number of vehicles sold, etc. And so why did that happen? The answer is that if you look in the engine bay of an ICE vehicle, there are 2,000 parts currently. So even back then, let's call it 1,000 parts in the engine bay. The problem that they ran into that resulted in Ford losing its market leadership position and continuing to lose it over time is that the entire auto business changed. The big change, if you did vertical integration, there were too many things that you're trying to vertically integrate on in terms of parts. Each of those parts was sort of changing and growing over time in terms of R&D. So what ended up happening is that Ford ran into a problem where they got behind in their R&D on different aspects of the vehicle, and their inability to maintain that R&D across all lines, while places like GM was doing outsourcing so they can let sort of the individual part manufacturers do their own R&D, and GM benefited from that. that sort of emerged as the standard across all auto, including GM and Ford. Well, what's interesting right now is that if you think about it, what, what Bob Lutz actually pointed out was that one of the many reasons why Tesla would go under is because Tesla was making batteries along with a number of other vertically integrated products within their vehicle. So what Bob predicted was that things like the battery factory for Tesla would become an anvil around the neck of the company and therefore bury it, while competitors would be able to simply buy the battery packs they needed from LG or others and simply blow Tesla out of the water based on a construct that would work better than the business model that Tesla had. So fast forward to now, and where are we at? Well, as you know, GM got rid of the $2 billion that they got from selling their European operations, and instead of building a battery factory, they gave the money back to investors. They then had to go back and get a government loan, I guess at low interest rates, towards the 0% zone, and they're using that money to currently build battery factories. So, whoa, now wait a second here. How is Tesla outflanking the folks at GM when you consider the fact that GM has maybe 4 times the number of engineers, 4 times the number of employees, 10 times the number of factories, etc.? How is this disaster happening? Obviously, you know that there's a bunch of reasons why that's happening, but I just thought it was fascinating because the conventional wisdom that was supposed to give the win to the traditional old line manufacturers has not been working out. And I don't think that, it's going to work out for them as they planned over the next few years, because there's still a lot of reverse R&D that those companies will have to do to close the gap on Tesla. So the intrigue right now is that when Tesla builds a factory, they're actually attaching a battery plant. And well, the question that pops up is, why isn't Tesla going the way of Ford in the 20s? Answer, 17 moving parts in the engine bay. So you may recall that Tesla just did a deal where they bought the old Hewlett-Packard headquarters in Palo Alto. And what you'll notice if you watch the buildings of Tesla, the first Tesla headquarters and R&D building was actually in the Stanford office park, and it was about let's say a half-hour bike ride from the center of Stanford's campus. Then they next door to that actually built a brand new facility that sort of tripled the space that the engineers had. No real closer distance to Stanford. Then when they did the Palo Alto facility, that was the old HP headquarters, they cut it down to maybe a 7 to 10 minute bike ride from the center of Stanford's campus. Now, that was an interesting move because so near there is the most expensive office space in the entire United States, meaning that Tesla's spending a large amount of money to maintain its presence proximate to Stanford. Now, there are 2 things that validate that. Number one, they have grad students in key departments doing internships or working part-time at Tesla. Number 2, it also gives them access to the ability to sort of develop new technologies, hardware, software, as well as literally alloys and other things that are experimental that are well beyond what competitors might be able to do. So literally, Elon ends up with a Stanford back end, and that Stanford back end gives them routine access to some of the best people in the world when it comes to all manner of technology and technology development across key entities that are critical to the success of the company. So he can validate spending the money for some expensive office space in Stanford Research Park because it gives him access to all of those resources. Well, when we look at GM, for example, GM is a great company. Their back end, they actually have a university or two, obviously Michigan State they feed from. But when you think of top of the line research entities, you really have to think of Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Caltech. There's a group of entities that really push the envelope when it comes to research. And so one of the problems that's happened here in terms of GM's $29 billion plan domination of Tesla is that when you only have 17 parts in the engine bay for that vehicle, obviously the battery is more than one part because there are 4,000 cells when you're at 2170 and maybe 1,000 cells when you're at 4680s. The problem that sort of pops up is that Tesla is between 80 and 90% vertically integrated. And because they're integrated, their competitors can't just buy off the shelf the parts that are currently being used within a Tesla vehicle. So until they reverse engineer this, that's no bueno. This is not working as planned. There's kind of a secret weapon for Tesla that I'm really intrigued by that I've been watching. And what you'll notice is that Tesla has gone from level 1 chargers to level 2 to now installing level 3s. And one would think that once we get to level 4, if and when we get there, we're dropping below 10 minutes for the charge of that vehicle. And so I just think that we're in a very interesting zone right now where the competitors are trying to catch up. The bar is being moved forward. But once the level 4 charger comes out, it won't be solid state fast. But once you start hitting that 10-minute refill zone for those batteries, the marginal utility of some of the advanced products that are coming out is going to start to go down. So, one example would be, hey, if it takes a half hour for me to recharge my vehicle at a charging facility, I may just stick with an ICE vehicle or something like that. Well, if you give me 500 miles of range, and I recharge at home, somewhat that's why, the folks at Lucid are getting some traction. The issue that pops up then is that if we go from, let's say, a 30-minute recharge at those facilities to a 10-minute recharge or even less, it's not 5 minutes like a regular gas station, but the incremental extra time for a recharge has now entered the zone where the size of the population of people willing to move to electric vehicles and not uncomfortable with how they would manage those vehicles on a regular basis sort of increases the whole deal. So I thought that when we watched the agreements between Tesla and a large number of manufacturers to all of a sudden come onto the Tesla charging facilities, I was like, okay, Tesla looks like they've won this. But then we received the announcement that a number of these manufacturers have also decided to gang up and produce their own charging facilities to compete with Tesla to avoid, I guess, giving Tesla that much power over their vehicles. And I just think that makes sense. You have an open competition now going between what these companies can come up with and what Tesla's already delivering. And I think it's going to take some time for them to both build a solution as well as get enough of them installed, make sure they're working, and really solve the problem of the fact that Tesla's done a really good job of building out their facilities. So what I'm really trying to get at here is the fact that from Bob Lutz analysis and from Mary Barra, 2025, with all the money GM can spend and their footprint globally, should be able to defeat Tesla. The challenge, though, is that GM keeps changing their strategy for very good reasons. And each of those strategies take time to both define and implement. And that just gives Tesla more time to get ahead. So I was kind of stunned with this whole thing and decided to bring it up because in the electric space, between Bob Lutz predicting supremacy by GM and the other OEMs, and then Mary Barra parroting the same thing with the same result. Vehicles not selling, battery problems in terms of fires that they originally had. Initially saying we're going to use Tesla's charging, not put out the 400 million to build those chargers, then switching gears and saying we're joining this group that's going to build its own chargers, so therefore it may or may not implement the agreement with Tesla. I was really targeting in this show just to look at the fact that this is like complete chaos in terms of how the future looks in the field. And the conclusion I therefore have is the only clear, well thought out solution out there for those that are buying electric vehicles continues to be Tesla. And competitors, I think, will continue to work hard to develop themselves as a presence. But I think for consumers who truly want the best solution, Tesla remains it. There's an open question, though, as to wait, Mary, why would you say, one, I'm going to spend $25 billion, dollars, and two, claim you're going to be superior to Tesla by 2025? The only thing I can assess is that she enjoys the CEO slot and the pay that comes with it and responsibility that goes with it. But I find it strange that she can make predictions and continue to be wrong and not lose any jobs in the process. So if any of you out there would like to claim that you're going to borrow 25 billion and superior to Tesla by 2026, I think that the space is open until GM announces that soon, and we know that it's not going anywhere. And so the question is, when are we going to get, a legitimate response from the great auto companies in the world to Tesla's sort of threat? And I really think that the only response that they can, the point at which they can only deliver a legitimate response is if the stock price of Lucid falls low enough that GM can buy them and then port all the things they're doing to the Tesla technology within a Lucid or even a Rivian. And now they have something that they can replicate in large numbers and be successful with, because based on what we've seen thus far in terms of what's been delivered by the threats articulated by Bob Lutz and by Mary Barra, sometime in the next 10 or 15 years, they're going to cop a clue. But the whole market may have moved well away from them by then, so that their chance to catch up becomes zero. So will this be what occurs? Well, Tesla definitely will make promises about how many vehicles they're going to build, but they don't necessarily have to argue about whether they'll, be superior to a GM or others, because the consumers can see the answer to that without a major announcement being made. So we look forward to sort of moving down this road in the future as part of our conversation. I want to thank you for joining us in that vein. We also want to thank, we also want to move over to our usual health tips as we've discussed. Just a reminder, we definitely have a regimen of things that we recommend each day. That's 25 leg lifts per day prior to love making. Only a small salad. Also highly recommended that you consider a 20-minute walk every day as a way to both mentally and physically balance out. And also a note, no more than once a week for the for fried foods. And I was kind of looking to my side because I've kind of introduced a new idea, and this is my Whole Foods sort of, if you will, salad day. So Whole Foods has an awesome salad bar, and the goal is to move more onto sort of salads, etc., in a reasonably cost way. And if you're in a single household, you may not want to stash a whole bunch of things that might spoil in the fridge. So it makes it real easy to just make it a Whole Foods lunch day a couple of times a week as a way to port diet into sort of healthy affair that might enhance overall health. Any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Just au revoir, lehitro, choda hafez, trazi, ni hao ma, arrivederci, namaste, Hindi. And in Jamaica, we say enough respect, walk, good man. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. And bye for now. We look forward to your comments. And yes, I continue to discuss Bob Lutz because, as you've noticed, they're still using a lot of his techniques unsuccessfully as they try to get it done when it comes to electric vehicles. At any rate, once again, thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and bye for now.